I'll never forget that night in the Canadian wilderness. My friends, Liam, Claire, Alex, and I had planned a peaceful camping trip in a secluded forest in Ontario. The first day was magical, filled with laughter by the lake and ghost stories by the fire. But that night, everything changed. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to an unnatural silence. No wind, no animals, just the eerie stillness of the forest. Then I heard it. Slow, deliberate footsteps outside my tent. I whispered to Liam, who had heard it too. Soon, all 4 of us were awake, clutching flashlights and scanning the shadows. A sickly, rotting smell hung in the air, and then we saw it, a towering figure at the tree line. It stood at nearly 7 feet, with unnaturally long limbs and eyes that glowed a sickly yellow. Alex muttered, "It's a Wendigo." Growing up, we'd heard tales of the Wendigo, a creature cursed with insatiable hunger, lurking in the shadows. As it moved closer, its joints twisted grotesquely, each step more disturbing than the last. The stench grew overpowering. We bolted, abandoning our gear, flashlights barely illuminating our way through the forest. The creature pursued us, its footsteps heavy and relentless. At one point, Claire stumbled, eyes wide with terror as the Wendigo loomed over her. But as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished back into the shadows, leaving us trembling and shaken. We didn't stop running until dawn, when we finally reached the road. We returned later with a search party, but everything, our tents, gear, even the fire pit, was gone. Only strange, oversized footprints remained, trailing into the forest. Since that night, I haven't camped again, and every now and then I think back, wondering if the Wendigo still lurks in those woods, waiting for the next group of campers brave or unlucky enough to wander into its territory. I'd always loved the idea of Bigfoot, but I never expected to come face to face with something out of a campfire story. It was early October, the beginning of my solo trip into the remote mountains of northern Canada. I'd chosen a secluded spot, far from any town, accessible only by a winding dirt road and miles of dense forest. I'd been craving the solitude and the challenge of camping alone in the wilderness, a chance to clear my mind and reconnect with nature. By the time I'd set up camp, the sun was already dipping behind the towering peaks, casting long shadows across the trees. There was something about the way the trees leaned in toward each other, as if whispering, and the way the forest was utterly silent. No birds or wind, just stillness. I thought I was imagining it, chalking it up to nerves, but I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. That night, I sat by the fire, listening to the crackle of wood and trying to dismiss the odd quiet around me. I'd almost convinced myself it was nothing when I heard it, a distant, low howl that seemed to vibrate through the trees. At first, I thought it was a wolf, maybe even an echo from further up the valley. But then I heard it again, closer, louder, and so deep it made my bones shiver. It was unlike any animal I'd ever heard. It wasn't the lone call of a wolf or the haunting howl of the wind. This was something entirely different. I put more wood on the fire, trying to push away the unsettling feeling creeping over me. But then, somewhere to my left, a branch snapped. My head jerked in the direction of the sound, but the firelight only reached so far. I told myself it was probably just a deer or a bear, maybe curious about my camp. But as I listened, I heard more branches breaking, this time in a rhythmic, deliberate pattern, like something heavy was moving toward me. Every instinct I had told me to leave, but I was rooted to the spot, watching the dark tree line with a growing sense of dread. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it into the forest, the beam bouncing off the rough trunks and catching glimpses of thick, wet moss. For a moment, I thought I saw something, just the faintest shape. It was big, maybe a trick of the light, but before I could adjust my focus, it was gone, swallowed by the shadows. I backed up toward my tent, uneasy and wondering if I was letting my imagination run wild. But as I turned, I caught a faint, pungent odor hanging in the air, something earthy and musky, like wet fur mixed with rotting leaves. It was strong enough to make my stomach turn. I crawled into my tent, zipping it up tightly, trying to reassure myself that I was overreacting. I lay there, listening, straining to catch any sounds over the beating of my own heart. Hours passed in silence, and I eventually drifted into a restless sleep. Sometime after midnight, I woke up abruptly. I wasn't sure why at first, but then I heard it, breathing. Deep, heavy breaths, like someone knows something, was standing just outside my tent. It was close enough that I could hear the steady rhythm, the inhale and exhale, each breath deliberate and slow. I held my breath, paralyzed, praying it would move on, that whatever was out there wouldn't notice me. But then the tent shifted, a soft thud against the fabric, as if something massive had pressed its hand against the side of the tent. I could see the faint outline of fingers, long and thick, almost human-like, but far larger than any humans could be. My mind raced, fighting to process what I was seeing. Suddenly, the hand pulled back, and the breathing stopped. I felt a wave of relief, thinking it might be leaving, when I heard a low, guttural grunt, something so deep and primal that it sent a chill down my spine. The creature started moving around my tent, slow and deliberate, almost as if it were circling me. I held my breath, clutching my flashlight like a lifeline, knowing it was useless against whatever was outside. The footsteps stopped, and I could feel the presence just beyond the thin layer of nylon, waiting. And then, in a voice so faint it could have been a trick of the wind, I heard it, a low guttural sound, almost a word, a distorted attempt at speech. Leave! I was frozen, trying to comprehend if what I'd heard was real or some nightmare brought on by fear. My rational mind insisted it wasn't possible, that creatures like Bigfoot weren't real, and even if they were, they couldn't speak. But every instinct told me otherwise, that I needed to get out of there. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At first light, I packed up my things in record time, glancing over my shoulder with every movement. The forest around me seemed denser, darker, as if it was holding secrets. When I finally made it back to the road, I saw something that sent a final chill through me. Enormous footprints, each one deeply embedded in the earth, trailing from my campsite back into the forest. To this day, I don't know what I encountered up there in the Jabber. I can still hear that deep gibber voice in my mind, echoing in the quiet moments. It left me with one clear message. Some places in this world belong to the wild, and Jabber better left undisturbed.